Hey up everybody, welcome back to the Audi Cycling YouTube channel, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Velogames Ronde van Vlaanderen. Before we start, just want to say thank you. We have just recently hit 1,000 subscribers, so thank you to every single one of you who has subscribed. It's been a few years since we first started doing these previews for Velogames, and I'm really happy that we've kind of got to this point, just kind of creating a really good Velogames community. So once again, thank you for subscribing, and yeah, just can't wait to see what the rest of the year is going to bring. But let's talk about the Velogames Ronde van Vlaanderen. Of course, a lot of people are predicting that it's going to be a battle between the big three, let's call it, and that does make quite a lot of sense. I expect a lot of teams to be incorporating at least one of these riders. I think that's probably the best strategy to be going with. You can also take two of them. However, the budget doesn't allow you to take all three, unfortunately. So you are going to have to sacrifice one. And I'll talk about which one I think that might be in a minute. So, of course, we've got Pogacar, Wout van Aert and Mathieu van der Poel as the most expensive riders. And I think you can really pick any one of them, to be honest with you. I think they all have their upsides. I think that Wout van Aert has the advantage of the team. Mathieu van der Poel has the advantage of his incredible consistency at Flanders, and Pogacar has the advantage of being he's just a very unpredictable sort of rider. And I know that I always like to try and pick Pogacar, especially since last year I got burnt a few times by not picking him. Of the three, I would probably say that I'd be less likely to take Wout van Aert, just because at E3 he was struggling a little bit. I know that since then there has been a bit of time. There's been almost a week and a half between E3 and this race, but it does provide a bit of an inclination that perhaps Wout van Aert wasn't on the same level as those two, and especially in a race which is going to be even harder than E3 and it's longer. I think that Wout van Aert would be the one who I would be likely to drop first if you were to take any of the others, if you were to take two of the big three, that is. So that's the big guys done with. Alaphilippe I probably wouldn't be taking, just to be honest with you. I think we all know that Quickstep just aren't quite firing on all cylinders, and I think taking Alaphilippe would be a big risk and not worthwhile doing. I think that Mohoric at 26 is a decent one. I think he could certainly come inside the top 10, but he is still relatively expensive at 26 when you consider that there are perhaps better options who are 22 points, 20 points, for example. Perhaps it's not the most efficient use of points, but I do think that Mohoric could certainly be a bit of an outsider and could launch a bit of a surprise. Maybe could finish inside the top 5 if things really go his way. Asgreen, not a massive fan of. Caleb Ewan, do not pick Caleb Ewan. Of all the people that you could pick, don't make it Caleb Ewan, because he's just not going to do well. I'm sorry if Caleb somehow watches this video in some way. Christoph usually finishes somehow relatively well in this race, like top 15, but he hasn't quite seemed on his usual kind of Flanders-esque form in this year, so therefore I'm not likely to be picking Christoph. Pedersen, on the other hand, very consistent. You know, he's been looking really good so far in all these Cobble Classics, but he tends to just lack that kind of finishing edge in Flanders especially. I know that he finished second that one year when he was in the breakaway, but that was from the breakaway. That was a very different scenario, so therefore I'm not overly keen on Pedersen. I think that he'll probably finish top 15, I'd say, but I just think there are perhaps better choices. You know, Pidcock maybe could be one of those guys because of his unknown nature. He was okay at Dwaalsdorp. He finished 11th there. That's quite a good result. And I think that he could be the big surprise of the weekend, considering that we don't really know where his form is at. But with a bit of a break period between kind of his crash at Torreno and then his kind of subsequent racing, he could be coming into this race relatively fresh. You then have another one of the Jumbo-Visma riders, so that's Tige Benoot. I think that Tige is a decent option, but when things really get going, like when the attacks start flying, Tige Benoot probably isn't going to be the one following that. Picking him will be a bit of a... If he does well, it'll be a little bit lucky. It sounds a little bit harsh to say, but I just think that he's not going to be following the moves, so you'll have to get fortunate that he will get ahead of the moves between the climbs. And I think that perhaps Christophe Laporte, considering that he has won Gent-Wevelgem and Dwaalsdorp-Zlanderen, might be the better choice of the Jumbo-Visma riders, is basically what I'm trying to say. Kuznetsov, Gourmet, Lampard, not that great choices, to be honest with you. They haven't shown the form which I'd be wanting for somebody. Kung, on the other hand, A bit more of a rogue rider, I suppose, in that he did quite well in this race last year, but he was 16 credits last year, and now he's 22, so a bit more expensive. Probably worthwhile putting on if you're wanting a top 10, but he's probably... It's going to be hard for him to be winning this race, and again, might it be a better idea to take a Laporte, considering potential assist points from Wout van Aert, and also the fact that Laporte's a faster finisher. Is Laporte more likely to do better than Kung? Probably, is what I'm trying to say. Other 22 pointers, Stuyven, Matthews, turns. Essentially from this, take away that Laporte and Kung are probably the best 22 point riders alongside maybe Benoit. The other ones probably aren't that worthwhile touching. 20 point riders, Garcia Cortina of course finished in 5th place at E3, so that's quite a good sign going into this race. I think that Movistar could launch a bit of a surprise here. I think a lot of people are underestimating them, and I think that everybody's been kind of noting that. Madouas is another strong one, podium finisher last year, will probably finish inside the top 10 again, considering how active he has seemed in a lot of these races, like a Dwars Doors, like an E3. I think that he is certainly a strong rider to be putting on, and probably him and Ivan Garcia are the best 20 pointers to be going with. Everybody else I would probably not go near. 18 point riders, I really like Søren Kragh for the following reasons. He's looked really strong in these races recently. Think back to E3 especially. Could he therefore finish inside the top 10? Yes. And also, if Van der Poel wins, he gets, I think, 90 assist points from Van der Poel winning, and that is a hell of a lot of points just for the assist points. So you get the finishing ability of Kragh Andersen, probably likely to be inside the top 10, plus the assist points. I think that's a really good combination to be going with. So I'm going to strongly recommend Søren Kragh, Bettiol, Hofstetter, Honore. I mean, they could all do well on their day. Like Sepp Van Mark as well is a pretty decent one. They can all do well on their day, but I just think that Kragh Andersen's the best one. Like, yeah, Fred Wright, Velen, Sepp Van Mark, Tergis, Seneschal, Schachmann. They're all good choices, and you could certainly justify putting them on, but I'm just saying that I think Søren Kragh's the best. If you had to push me for my second favourite one, I would probably say Sepp. Van Mark is my next favourite one. Just from his form, I think that, he finished third at Gent-Wevelgem. That's a pretty decent result for him. So I'd say that he's my second favourite 18-point rider. 16-point riders, again, there's not too much to be shouting about here. Pollitt and Paulus being the best ones for sure, especially Paulus. Third place at Dwars Doors Vlaanderen. He could really finish inside the top 10, possibly a top 5 if things really go his way in this race. And I think that he's quite a good, reasonably priced option for you to be picking if you need a 16-point rider. And then Pollitt's the other one, which I would say is likely the second best choice of the 16s. 14-point riders, not too many which I like. Maybe Haller, Louvel, especially Louvel. I think he could probably be top 20 in this race. Navarez looked decent at Dwars Door, but he might be working more for Pidcock this race, considering that he's kind of coming back a bit more from his injury. Sheffield just hasn't quite been firing on all 4 cylinders, so probably not the best choice. Taco will probably get him a break, but that's a really expensive rider to be banking on getting him a breakaway. So overall, the 14-point riders aren't that great, so probably not worthwhile going near. 12-point riders, there is Jorgensen, 4th place at E3, very promising. Probably the best 12-point rider for you to be going with. I think a lot of people might be putting him on because he's a low-price guy at 12. That's getting towards kind of a mid-level kind of riders. And I think that he is, probably a decent one to be going with. Gianni Vermeersch, maybe. He could sneak a top 20 and assist points on Van der Poel. 10-point riders, Stan de Wolf possibly looks like the best AG2R rider. Kevin Genietz has been getting into some decent moves recently with the Groupama boys up front. And then outside of them, Van Hooijdonk and Tosh van der Sande, especially Van Hooijdonk. I think he could certainly be top 20, maybe assist points on Wout van Aert being in the podium. Seems to be in really good form recently. Think back, he's got quite a few just decent top 20 results. Could definitely see him doing that again in this race. 8-point riders, I think the best one, I'll go straight to him. The best one is probably Chris Neylands, 12th place at E3, and that's usually a pretty good indicator for the Ronde van Vlaanderen. So therefore, Chris Neylands is going to be my best 8-point rider for you to be going with. I think a lot of people should be thinking about trying to put him onto their teams. You've also got assist points from Affini and Dillier, perhaps, but there are cheaper options for fulfilling that role. Legac finished 9th at Dwars Door, so you could pick him. And then the other ones aren't that great. 6-point riders, again, Ballestedt for the assist points on Van der Poel if you wanted that. You got Schoenbachs for the assist points on Tadej Pogacar, but Michael Bjerg might be the better choice considering that he was good at Gent-Wevelgem. I think he was 6th place, so more likely to finish inside the top 30 and get the assist points as well. Lascano after his 2nd place at Dwars. I expect a lot of people to be putting Lascano on, but remember that he was there because he got into the breakaway, and Dwars doesn't necessarily correlate like massively with the Tour of Flanders, so just don't go jumping on Lascano. Just think critically about it just for a second. Maybe it might be safer to go with somebody else with assist points, but I do think that Lascano is, of all the 6-point riders, probably one of the better ones for finishing actually inside the top 30 and getting you some points. Norsgaard possibly could be getting in the breakaway. He usually does in these Belgian classics. Rui Oliveira 22nd at E3, and he might also be getting assist points on Pogacar if he finishes on the podium, so bear that in mind as well. Rui Oliveira I think is one which I'm seriously considering putting onto my team. Jonas Rutsch, I think, is another strong candidate for finishing inside the top 30. Tim van Dijk for the assist points on Wout van Aert. He's the cheapest Jumbo-Visma rider that you can be picking. And then, of course, the standard shout-out of Sam Watson because he's from Yorkshire, so therefore I have to mention him. 4-point riders gets a little bit thin on the ground, to be honest with you. You're looking mainly at maybe like Friesson for finishing top 30, considering he's looked good in some of the recent cobbled races, but they were very wet, so that's why he did well there. There's also the guys who like Thomas Bonnet and Louis Blue. Blue was in the breakaway at the Omloop Het Nieuwsblad. Bonnet was in the breakaway at E3, so I'm looking mainly at guys who have gone in breakaways in other cobbled races, and that's mainly my gauge for picking these riders. Or you could just lock out the Bingol's Pal Sources guys and hope that one of them gets in there. This is the team that I have at the moment. It's kind of, I quite like it. 2 of the big guys who I'm thinking are going to be finishing on the podium. Søren Krauth for a top 10 plus assist points on Van der Poel. Rui Oliveira for a top 30 and assist points on Pogacar, and Chris Neylands for like a top 15. Alternatively, I am thinking that I might go with something like this, where instead of Pogacar and Rui Oliveira, I go with Laporte and Paulus. So those are the 2 sort of scenarios that I'm thinking of going with. But now let's take a look at the classic squad game and the transfers that I've made going into this race. In this game, what I've done is I have essentially just picked the big 3. So I've got Pogacar, Wout van Aert and Mathieu van der Poel. In terms of who's actually taking part, I've got a lot of other 4-point riders, so plenty of UAE riders and also Dillier in there. We've also put in Oscar Riesebeek to try and slot in. I tried to slot in Wout van Aert as well. Or was it, but it might have been Pog. And I've left in Philipsen because there is Schelder plays after this, and I think he's taking part in that. So I wanted to try hold on to that so I could kind of keep him in for that race. And then lastly, going into the women's race, I have this team where I have essentially stacked up on SD Works. So I've got Vollering, Reuser and Lotte Kopecky. If one of those doesn't finish on the podium, I would be shocked, to be honest with you. And then I backed it up with a Schweinberger, Eleanor Barker and Van Anrooy. I could also swap out Van Anrooy and get Majoras in there, another SD Works rider, if I so wanted, just to try and really lock out all of the options for SD Works. I could go for something like that. There are some pretty decent 6-point riders. There's also Vanderdown. There's also Diedrichsen. But I think that Schweinberg is probably the best one. I don't think there are too many. You could go with Guazzini as well for FDJ, but she is more of like a sprint type, to be honest with you. So that's why I'm not really considering putting her on. Schweinberger has been up there in a lot of these one-day races, especially in these Belgian ones. So I really like her for this. And then in terms of the 4-point riders, I've gone with Barker because she has finished really strong, like 22nd at Dwaalsdorp, but also up there in Gent-Wevelgem. You could also go with Lotte Hentala. I know I've recommended her and she's been taken off the start list a lot of times, but she is finally on the start list, so she's another 4-point rider. Bit more of a sprinter type, but might certainly be in there. So I'm definitely stacking up on SD Works. And that is the Ronde van Vlaanderen Velogames for the Super Classico Classic Squad game and the women's race. Let me know in the comments down below who you're thinking of going with. I'll be sure to try and respond to give some advice on anybody's teams. And all that is left to say is to stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Salut!
it.